the title of my talk today, as Sonali said, is Can Digital Literacy be Used to Leapfrog Illiteracy? I thought I should just give some background on what I'm working on at the moment. It's not completely linked to what I'll be talking about today, but what I'm talking about today forms the foundation for what I work on at the Alan Turing Institute. So I thought it was important just to share this. So as Sonali mentioned, I lead a project called the Women in Data Science and AI. And we look at, well, we use research in order to inform policy, primarily in the UK, but also globally, at increasing women's equality in the data science and AI fields. So obviously this is looking at the frontiers of technology. Everything I'll be talking today kind of forms a baseline and is absolutely key to the research that we're doing at the Turing. Okay, so as Sonali mentioned, I'll be talking around the report that we released earlier this year with Judy Wiseman and Anna Fitzmaurice. And just to foreground what I'm talking about, that as you know, this topic is huge and I won't really even be able to scratch the surface in 20 minutes. But I thought what I'll do is pull out some of the key findings and conclusions from the report that link to how we can use digital literacy to leapfrog illiteracy. So the report was a background paper for UN Women, and it looked at the last 25 years of technological advancements and how that affects women's empowerment and women's equality or inequality. And so our premise was that over the last 25 years, since the adoption of the Beijing Declaration and Platform for Action, the rapid spread of digital technologies, so that's everything from the mobile phone and the smartphone, the Internet of Things, right the way to data science and AI, has been pervasive across almost every area of socio-political and economic life across both public and private sectors. So our main argument in the paper is that the digital revolution has brought massive potential to improve social and economic outcomes for women, which is brilliant. But at the same time, it also poses the risk of perpetuating existing patterns of gender and other inequalities. And despite a number of important and really exciting initiatives and interventions and policies in the area aimed at furthering women's empowerment, there's still a significant digital divide and inequalities in digital literacies. And as I'm sure you all know, it's getting worse now due to the COVID-19 pandemic. So this basically limits the equitable realization of the benefits of the digital revolution across high, low and middle income countries alike. And so in the report, we focus on three areas, which is education, work and social and welfare services. But today I'll be focusing mainly on the first part, which is education, as it's most important for looking at digital literacy. It's also important to note, as I just mentioned, that the paper was written and published just before the pandemic really took hold. And so it's important to quickly reflect on the new implications that our findings and our policy recommendations have in the new environment, in the new era. Obviously, digital technology is now more relevant than maybe it's ever been. And it's been leveraged in a number of really promising ways in the response across all different sectors. But obviously that's by no means the whole story. And the pandemic has not only exposed, but exacerbated existing power structures, inequalities, both online and offline. And so in a way, the internet has evolved to become a key utility and a public good, but is obviously still not available for so many people. I guess what I'm trying to say is that the pandemic has collided with existing and deeply embedded societal inequalities. And so the varying effects of the pandemic are being felt disproportionately by the least powerful among us. And I think that's something, as I'm talking, to keep in mind, particularly with respect to women, who there's been some really interesting research coming out around the impact of the pandemic on women specifically. So, for example, the vast number of frontline healthcare workers and care workers and social workers are women. Unpaid domestic work has increased. There's been a rise in domestic violence, which the UN are calling the shadow pandemic. There's been new barriers in receiving formal education on top of the existing barriers for women, particularly in low and middle income countries. And so this is something to hold in mind as I'm talking, that COVID risks permanently reinforcing this digital gender divide. I'm sure you know this already, but I just wanted to ground my talk in what is the global gender digital divide. So in 2018, it was estimated that women's access to the internet and mobile phones is about 85% of the level for men, and that a total of 1.7 billion women in the global south are unconnected. And then according to OECD, worldwide, roughly 327 million fewer women than men have a smartphone and can access mobile internet, which is what you can see here. But once defined by inequalities to access in digital technology, as you can see in the graph, the digital gender divide is now more about deficits in learning and skills. So of course, there is still an access gap between men and women, particularly in developing economies. The gender digital skills gap is persistent, and that's what we really need to focus on. So as I mentioned, despite a number of really important and key initiatives aimed at achieving digital equality in digital literacies across both developing and developed economies, the divide not only remains large now, but is in fact, in certain contexts, growing. So I just wanted to quickly jump back to the framing we use in the paper in order to look at gender and technology. So we base our framing, so I'm a social scientist, and we base our framing on a field called Science and Technology Studies, STS, alongside intersectional feminist theory. So I'm sure you know what intersectionality is, but just to once again ground it for my talk, it's the way in which gender intersects with other aspects of difference. So, for example, women who are poor or belong to a minority experience the negative effects of digitalization and what that may bring more acutely. So many discussions of digital technologies, particularly those presented by big tech and the big tech companies, the developers themselves, often make what we call technologically deterministic claims about the technology. So this is that there's an assumption that technology impinges on society from the outside. So assuming that technological change is autonomous and value-free, and it's technology that causes social change. But by contrast, the social shaping approach that we used in the paper understands technologies themselves as socially shaped, not only in their usage, but also in their design, their technological content, and so on. And so which technologies have been and will be developed is fundamentally shaped by the people that are developing it and everything that wraps into this. So their experiences, their priorities, their history, their choices, their values. So an intersectional feminist analysis, therefore, examines the ways in which gender power relations influence the process of technological change and what we decide to develop and how we decide to develop it. Technology shape and are shaped by gendered power structures. And in this way, it's key to remember that gendered practices mediate the digital revolution, and then the roots of the networks that shape and deploy these different technological systems, whether they're the internet or artificial intelligence. As such, gender-based exclusion and inclusion must be located within these broader structural trends. And so, as I mentioned before, while the digital transformation, while the last 25 years of digitalization holds out the promise of greater gender equality and greater gender digital literacy, you know, for example, the internet has been hailed as a democratizing and emancipatory platform, which of course it can be. At the same time, we need to be careful around the risk that it poses of repeating and amplifying existing gender inequalities, often offline inequalities into online structures. So going back to the digital gender divide, now I've grounded the kinds of theory we use to look at this. So certain gendered norms govern technical participation right across the life course, from the earliest stages of education, right through the workforce, right through after working and how you interact with different technologies. And this produces absences, gendered absences across the fields and across all stages of technological development. And this reinforces, as you can see in the chart, gender deficits in all the way through the STEM pipeline into future technological development, which risks further construction of these biases and a type of feedback loop. And so on the graph, you can see that lower proportions of women enroll and graduate in engineering and ICT subjects. Girls and women's relatively lower enrollment and graduation in the STEM disciplines, which would allow them greater participation in the digital world and higher digital literacy, perpetuates a cycle of widening gaps and greater inequality, especially in disadvantaged areas. And so education in gender responsive and gender transformative learning environments has a key role to play in helping women and girls develop their digital skills. And I think what's key is gain confidence in developing these digital skills. And so this is the case from the most basic levels of proficiency to the most advanced skills in AI and machine learning. I wanted to highlight this paper I've put on this slide because I think it explains well how the context of developing economies is particularly complex, with myriad and overlapping things we need to consider. So women and girls may not even have financial independence to purchase technologies in the first place or to access the internet. And many might struggle to access public ICT facilities. Their access might be controlled and monitored by men. And so everything I've been talking about obviously has to be taken in this context of access as a baseline to digital skills. But what I like about this paper is, which I'd really recommend for everyone to read, it's not too long, and it's just really interesting, is that when attention is paid to the right structural factors, change can happen. So the study on digital literacy that I've highlighted here in Indonesia showed that teaching women how to create content and share information across social media, across digital media, can open up opportunities for not only their professional development, but economic development. And what I thought was really important in this paper as well is that the researcher found that a key thing is for collaboration between a number of different stakeholders in order to help this to happen and in order to raise digital literacy levels. So the collaboration was needed among Indonesian women's empowerment programs, from the government as policymakers and the key builders of the infrastructure in which this education is happening. NGOs as initiators of, often as initiators of women's empowerment programs and groups. And then of course, probably the most important, from the communities themselves, as developers and those who can help to support and expand the rollout of different women's empowerment programs and the technologies which are linked closely to them. And they found this was particularly important for women in rural areas. So I definitely recommend reading that if you have a chance. So once again, I'm sure you know what digital literacy is, but I thought it was important just to revisit here that it's obviously more than simply knowing how to operate a computer. And I've added here on this slide the Digital Literacy Global Framework by UNESCO, which the typeface is very small, but I'm happy to share the presentation after, as I think it's a really helpful framework. And it explains how digital literacy is having the ability to find resources, to critically evaluate the resources, create new resources. In other words, it's a necessary life skill. And I argue that the best way to frame digital literacy is through its promotion of democracy. So basically, digital literacy promotes democracy in a few different ways. So for women, it can foster economic participation, entry into the labour market. For often illiterate women, it can provide access to finance, financial opportunities, mobile banking, through, for example, text messaging systems. It can provide community and political engagement, opportunities for activism and collective action. And then, of course, it can provide access to information and different communication opportunities. So now I'm really coming to the title of the talk. As such, in all these different ways, digital literacy can offer leapfrog opportunities and help empower women, essentially giving them ways in which to bypass some of the traditional cultural and mobility barriers they face offline, particularly in low and middle income countries, but also in high income countries. And there was an example that I found quite poignant, which was that women unable to join the demonstrations during Sudan's protest movement, particularly rural women who are typically constrained by patriarchal structures, recorded and shared their support for the movement on social media, so on Facebook and Twitter. And then another example I thought was important to mention was that in Rwanda, and this was the figure as of a couple of years ago, so I'm not sure what it is now, but over 3,500 women farmers are now connected through mobile technology to information, markets and finance. And a key point about this example as well is that the way in which these women are given the financial education is not through the traditional formal educational channels. And research has found that the most important points in which to teach women this kind of financial capability and financial information is at the key points in which they need it. So they call them at the teachable moments. So I thought that was really interesting. So essentially prioritizing women's digital literacy in these ways by combining mobile technology with existing welfare programs, if they exist, can potentially empower women. And another important point I just wanted to mention as well is that digital literacy allows many women to, or can allow many women to join the gig economy because it allows for more flexibility in work. And that's what a lot of the literature says, but I would say to just be very careful when looking at this, because efforts need to be made to ensure the flexibility doesn't occur at the cost of reduced job quality. So, for example, less pay, less job security, less social protection, that kind of thing. I wanted to highlight a few of the really, really great grassroots examples and examples of initiatives through NGOs. And I deliberately There's a few examples from big tech, so places like Google and Facebook, but I've found, and I think you all agree too, that grassroots and initiatives by NGOs work much better and have much more of an understanding of how technologies and infrastructures work in the communities that they're trying to reach. So here I've highlighted three really interesting and exciting educational initiatives for lifelong distance learning and training. And this is particularly important, as you know, during the current pandemic, when so much learning has moved online, and we want this online learning to be available for as many women and girls as possible. The first one is a really interesting project called Making Ghanaian Girls Great. And it's Ghana's first interactive distance learning project. And it uses solar and satellite enabled distance learning infrastructures. So kind of bypassing a lot of the traditional digital infrastructures to deliver interactive learning sessions, not only to the students and the younger women, but also the teachers, communities and government officials. The second one I've highlighted is a project called Calibri. I'm sorry if that's not pronounced correctly, but it's created by Learning Equality. And it's a set of tools for low income countries that are, the key thing is that they're open source. So they can be accessed by everyone, essentially. And then the third one I've highlighted is an initiative called Tiger, which is These Inspiring Girls Enjoy Reading. And it's been built by the Open Learning Exchange, OLE, and it's targeted to Syrian refugees in Jordan. And this is for girls and women. It's also important to note that there's no large-scale systematic review of gender, lifelong learning, and technology, which would obviously be really, really helpful when looking at this. But so there's a gap also, if anyone wants to fill that gap, that would be really, really great. But individual cases are really promising examples of ways in which digital tools can help promote gender equality across educational systems and raise levels of digital literacy. And then here I also wanted to highlight some really interesting broader vocational and educational initiatives. So the first one, Mirror Channel, is really, really interesting. So it's a general healthcare information delivery service available, I think it's just in India. Or actually, I think it's elsewhere, but primarily in India. But it specifically targets women who live in rural areas and have few resources. And the way it works is it adopts what they call an edutainment model of education. And it's to promote health around critical issues. So the way in which they engage often low literate women, essentially the way the app works is the content for the app is in one window, and then in the other window, the content is accompanied by different pictures and pictographs and graphs and simple text. So semi-literate and low literate women can easily navigate the menu and easily navigate the app. And the emphasis on the pictures is also supplemented by audio, so that the same content can be conveyed to women who cannot read. So I think that's a really, really key and promising example. The second one is Barefoot College, which isn't super technical in the way that some of the other examples I've presented are, but I think it's important because it's more to do with the underlying infrastructure, which is key when we're trying to raise levels of digital literacy to leapfrog illiteracy. So it's a women-centered global network dedicated to sustainable development in communities where poverty exists. And then the third example is a platform called She Trades, and it is primarily for women entrepreneurs and women business owners, organizations and companies to connect with and learn from each other, and crucially to access distant markets where women might be in rural areas and lack that connection and mobility offline. There's also a really interesting project, which I also didn't put in here because I only found out about it last night, but it's called the Digital Gender Gaps Project. And I saw an early iteration of it a few months ago, but now it's really, really interesting. And it aims to track progress on gender inequalities in internet and mobile access and usage in real time. And so essentially trying to measure women's participation in the digital revolution. And this is one of the key, and I'll come to this at the end of my talk, but this is so key because there is so little data, quality data collected and accessible around what we're discussing. It's so important to have initiatives like this to help us understand better the problems that we're trying to tackle. Addressing the barriers to gender equality in digital literacy obviously requires critical understanding of each country's separate economic, political, social, cultural climates. Essentially, there's no one solution to closing the digital gender divide and to using digital literacy to leapfrog illiteracy. And remedies obviously have to be grounded in contextual evidence about which barriers are at play across different countries. It's also really important to note, and we noted this in the report, that growing investment in digital technologies in the education sector in particular sometimes risks replacing traditional investments in physical and human educational infrastructure, especially in developing economies and rural areas that will typically struggle with teacher shortages. So I just wanted to end on some updated policy recommendations. So at the end of our UN Women report, we provided some policy recommendations based on our findings, but I've now had a chance to reflect on those recommendations, particularly within the context of the pandemic. And essentially, technologies can provide many, many opportunities for women's empowerment, but obviously technology alone cannot address the systemic problems that drive the digital gender divide and drive lower levels of women's digital literacy. So if we're looking at governmental responsibility, the focus needs to be on concrete policy actions which foster women and girls' full participation and inclusion in education and in the digital revolution. But at the same time, it's really key that we address such deeply ingrained stereotypes, practices and norms that lead to discrimination and violence against women in general. So basically, plainly put, without digital literacy, digital access does not empower women and girls. And in our opinion, without a major escalation of gender sensitive and gender transformative policy efforts and crucially investments, we risk a lot of the benefits of technologies being captured solely by men and privileged women, further deepening the gender divide. And so these policy recommendations span long-term structural changes as well as short-term approaches. I also just wanted to highlight another example of a really great initiative, which is collecting gender disaggregated data around COVID-19, which, as I mentioned, is so important when we're thinking about not only digital literacy for women, but all women's issues. Yeah, so I've provided, and I'm sure Sonali will be happy to share, I've provided because this is just such a huge topic, I couldn't even scratch the surface. I provided a list of really, really great reading and resources, particularly written by women on the ground in these areas working on these problems, which I really recommend that you would read. Thank you.